Well, good afternoon. This is Dyke Hendrickson. I'm the host of a podcast known as Life Along the Merrimack. In this show, we talk about different things, frequently the Merrimack River, because the show is Life Along the Merrimack, and we talk about the history and some of the people who have made the Merrimack River what it is. Today is an interesting moment. We're going to be talking about a woman named Ellen Swallow Richards. Now, in part, this is because this year marks the 100th anniversary of women's voting. And Ellen Swallow Richards was a very unusually smart person. She worked at MIT, and she was one of the ones who cleaned up the Merrimack River in the 1890s when typhoid came along and the water was not being scientifically cleaned, but the poor families drank it. So Ellen Swallow Richards lived from 1842 to 1911. She was the first, she's so many firsts, it's really interesting. She's the first woman student at MIT. She was the first woman instructor at MIT. And she earned enough credits to get the first master's degree at MIT, but they wouldn't give it to her in about 1875 because they had never given one to a woman, so she did not get one. Nevertheless, to show goodwill, she taught at MIT for 5 years in the science department, in the labs, for no pay. So I think this is a smart woman, and B, a very cooperative woman. So we're going to move along and talk a little about what she did as we talk about the Merrimack River. We've discussed this before. The Merrimack starts in central New Hampshire, comes down to Lowell, and then heads over towards Newburyport. It used to be a great shipbuilding community, and look how large those ships were. This is about 1853. Richard Burke Jones, the city clerk of Newburyport, is the one who painted this. He's also a gifted painter, more than a city clerk. On the other hand, he's more than just a painter. So that is what it looked like a long time ago. Here are some of the vessels that were built on the Merrimack River. There are over 1,000 built from 1790 to 1810, which was the golden era. And look how large this is. Kids would get out of school, people would leave their jobs, and it's a very exciting day when the ship Symington launched in about 1893. Going further up the river, the Pawtucket Falls in Lowell was one of the institutions that made the Merrimack River what it is. And what I mean by that is they were able to harness the power of the falls, and soon textile mills were built in Lowell in about 1821. So we're coming up on 2 centuries. And then 1823, 1824, they continued. Now, Henry David Thoreau, however, took offense because when you start harnessing the hydropower, building dams, building canals, the fish can no longer get up the river. So Henry David Thoreau was not very happy with this, but it happened. It created an industrial revolution on the Merrimack River, and that is one of the reasons the Merrimack is world known, and certainly known in this country, as one of the leaders in many aspects of industry, of science, and of the economy of the North Shore of Massachusetts. Here is an example of the Spicket River in Lawrence. As you can see, there were numerous buildings on the Spicket River, which is adjacent to the Merrimack River. There was a rail line here in about 1935. And may have been a little earlier than that, actually. But you can see that the river and the environment does not look too clean. Here's a mill clock in Lawrence. Lawrence had some of the largest buildings in the world. At one point, this was known as the second largest clock in the world, next to Big Ben in England. And people who live very near the mills would always be able to tell when the bell rang, rang maybe 10 minutes before the shift started, they'd have to hustle over. In those days, not everybody could afford watches, but most people could see the this huge clock from wherever they were. The Merrimack, as we talked about, goes deep into New Hampshire. This is Manchester, New Hampshire. In the mid-1930s, there was a tremendous flood. And here you can see the mills of Manchester are being overwhelmed. Manchester was among the largest communities in the country that was making textiles. And just like the Massachusetts cities, it was the one that used the river and made an enormous amount of cloth, of wool, and a very strong industry. And as a result of the strong industry, many immigrants were able to come to Massachusetts, to New Hampshire, to Maine. And so I have a different kind of view on this. Some, historians say the mills exploited the people to a great deal. It may have towards the later years, but for a long time, say 1890 to 1920, it gave jobs to people, going back a little further to 1868 to 1920, to the Irish who came over during a famine, to the Jews who came over from Russia and other places because they were being persecuted, to Greeks, Armenians, French Canadians. Many people came and found work. This is one of the most beautiful sites in New England. And here is an example of what it looks like on a clean day. There is a sandbar there. And if you've ever heard the tales, many amateur boatsmen get caught up, and especially at low tide, and they're going to be there for a few hours if they get caught on that bar. So generally, and this bar has been there for 100 years. It moves. No one can seem to displace it. So it's a good idea to go along the north wall of the opening here. The Coast Guard has been a familiar institution in Newburyport and the river. It was founded here in 1790 and as a revenue cutter service, and was created to stop smuggling, and it was created to make sure that ship captains were paying an adequate amount of due. The birthplace of the Coast Guard is Newburyport, and here are a couple of the vessels. And I would add, this is Life Along the Merrimack. I'm Dyke Hendrickson, the host. And I say this because I was driving along last week and I listened to the radio, 96.3 FM, and I heard the show, and it occurred to me, my show. So it occurred to me that I should be announcing myself frequently so radio listeners can hear, and also so that people will know what the show is and what we're talking about. The Merrimack is getting, from time to time, more polluted, but it is still an enormously beautiful river, as I think you can see. Here are several vessels in Amesbury. This is Maudsley State Park. This is from the Amesbury side, and it's about 475 acres, wonderful acres that the state got in about 1870 and 1985, and it's been a real asset to the North Shore ever since. Haverhill has made a significant comeback. It too had many mills along its banks, but you can see it has modern buildings now. University of Massachusetts of Lowell has a huge building there. You see in the center, several banks have put up headquarters, and they're using the river as a key point. Here is Lowell. The National Park Service in Lowell has many tours in which they talk about the river, how the river was used to create textiles. I should point out that this is not active this summer with the virus and everything. They're not going out, but this is an example of what a trip would look like. The Merrimack starts in Franklin, New Hampshire, and here is the fast water near the start of the waterway. And last summer, about this time, third week of August, the Voyagers, about a dozen elected officials and adventurers, went all the way down from Franklin, New Hampshire, all the way to Newburyport. It was a tremendous journey. They wanted to bring attention to the fact that sometimes the river is getting polluted because of sewage discharges. When there's too much rainwater in a sewage system, the rainwater mixes with the sewage and the entire amount is discharged into the river. So millions of gallons of sewage go into the Merrimack after every big rainstorm. So many people are working to avoid that, and the Voyagers went on this 117-mile journey. Took 4 days, but they wanted to bring attention to it. I like this photo. It's in Nashua, New Hampshire, where the Nashua River meets the Merrimack River. And Nashua is a large city, of course, in New Hampshire, but this is a bucolic spot where the two rivers meet. And of course, back to Manchester, New Hampshire. Here, you can see the size of the falls. You can see the electric works to the top of the frame. And this is a situation where Manchester has always been a leader. I should mention that there are still dozens of electric companies, electric generating companies in the Merrimack River. So the river is important for that reason. Also, more than 500,000 people get their drinking water from the Merrimack River, which is another reason why people are working hard to clean up the river. Now, these communities have facilities that clean the water, so it's drinkable. But I think you can understand the more effluent you take out of the water, the better the chances are it will be good to drink. Again, Lowell, Massachusetts. You can see the University of Massachusetts Lowell at the right, and you can see an awful lot of cement works and dams and canals and locks, and they've done a lot to capture the strength of the Merrimack. Also in Lowell, there's a very long boardwalk, as you can see here. We got some fishermen, we got some joggers, we have a mother with a baby, and so a lot of people do take care and enjoy the Merrimack River. This is a city river, and here's a couple areas where the buildings were very large. They used the water, and now there's a lot of brick and a lot of water still in Lowell. Manchester, New Hampshire, again, this is a beautiful shot. I think it shows how well the city is integrated with the river in its modern era. To the lower right and to the right, we can see some of the mill buildings, which are being used for universities, for medical, for entrepreneurs. And to the left, you see major banks and major buildings, major motels. And so Manchester is known in New England as one community who really has made a good go of it in changing its economy since the mills left. And again, because this is on radio, this is Life Along the Merrimack. It's a podcast, and I'm Dyke Hendrickson, and we're looking at slides. This is also going to be on television, on YouTube, and if you look up YouTube, Life Along the Merrimack, you will find it. Now, we have had 61 of these podcasts, which is pretty good. Here, as I mentioned the Voyagers a little earlier, here's Jim Kelcourse in the front. He is a state rep from representing Newburyport, Amesburyport, and Salisbury, and he is one of the group that went down 117 miles last August. And another, sometimes there's white water, sometimes there's a little calmer water. And I think everybody enjoyed this part when you had some current behind you, and I think you had a few moments to kind of rest up. Here is Newburyport Harbor, the end of the run for this group. In the last 10 or 20 years, it's become populated with pleasure boats. As you can see, there are 1,500 pleasure boats registered along the Newburyport, Salisbury, and Amesbury ports. And so, 60 years ago, 50 years ago, Newburyport was not a pretty town. It was failing, as a matter of fact. But they started rebuilding the downtown, and it has a nice colonial look today, and they've cleaned up the river. Again, We don't have so many fishing boats today, but it's a situation. There's about 8 or 10 in the summer, but they still come to Newburyport Harbor. Now we're talking about major people who helped the river, and Ed Muskie was one of them. The Merrimack River got cleaned after 1972, when this Clean Water Act of 72 went into effect. He did a lot of work, and incredibly, there was no environmental movement in the 60s. It wasn't until 1969, the Cuyahoga River in Ohio caught fire. Time magazine put it on its cover, and people suddenly said, my God, these rivers are terrible. And so Ed Muskie was one of those who said, I can do something about this. He did run for president. He dropped out before it actually came down to him being on the ballot, but he became a major national figure in 1968. And here he is in the early 70s, pushing hard for the Clean Water Act of 1972. And I should mention Senator George Mitchell of Maine was also a very important factor. Mitchell came along in 1987 after Muskie had left the Senate because Governor Ronald Reagan in 1987 wanted to close down all the funding to build new sewage treatment plants. And so Muskie was gone, but Mitchell got together with a group and was able to make amendments that saved the clean water funding. Now, Reagan was successful in getting rid of the grants. Governments could only ask for low interest loans, not grants. But George Mitchell, I do say this, and was the one who brought back and saved the program. It's very valuable. Paul Tsongas was very important in the 70s and 80s. I think many remember him. He wasn't as linked to the river as, say, Muskie, but was a very important person. He made Lowell what it is today. Here's a wonderful photo of them, and I like this photo. And we're coming to the end of our presentation now, but I did want to mention Ellen Swallow Richards again. When we're talking about Lowell and Lawrence in 1890, and I'll just bring it down one more because in 1890, there were many deaths by typhoid in mostly Lawrence and Lowell. And the state health educators said, something's wrong. People who live near the river are getting sick, in some case dying of typhoid. And they got a group together from MIT, and Helen Swallow Richards, who had been there for several decades, was one of the leaders of the science team that tested the water in Lowell and Lawrence and found, although it was being cleaned and it was been fluoridated, it was not adequately clean. Now, the wealthy people in those days lived away from the river, and they drank water from their own wells, so they were fine. The working people lived near the mills. They drank the water from the Merrimack, and typhoid broke out. So Ellen Swallow Richards was the one that I'm going to have. I'm going to mention her in my book. My book is Merrimack, the Resilient River. I'm going to have several photos of her, but I wanted to mention her because she's so unusual. She also was one of the leaders of bringing school lunch to Boston. She started the American Association of University Women, and she also is considered the mother of home economics. She believed that, homemakers should be concerned about what they're making and be concerned about cleaning the house and all these things. It sounds like we've heard it before, but that's, a century and a half later. She was early with this stuff. And the one I like, and this is my last remark, I think we're about out of time. About a decade ago, MIT officials had made a list of the most innovative MIT graduates ever. There were 150 people on the list, and she was number 8. Number 8, I'm telling you. out of 150. And if you know MIT, and I used to cover technology for the Boston newspapers, everyone's brilliant there. The fact that after all this time, Ellen Swallow Richards was designated number 8 is very thrilling. So that's it for me today. I enjoy being with you. I'm not going to be well, I'm going to be here next week, but I'm going to be from the wilds of Maine. So I just hope that my connection is good. I enjoy doing this. I hear it on the radio now. I'm going to start looking for it on YouTube and other devices. And I'm going to be bringing answers to what is happening about the river. How can we make it cleaner? How can we replicate the work of Ed Muskie and George Mitchell, and earlier than that, Ellen Swallow Richards. So that's it for me. Life Along the Merrimack. I'm Dyke Hendrickson. Please tune in next week and we'll continue to talk about this great river. Thank you.